A guttural, trumpet-like roar tears through the dust of the battlefield, drowning out the clash of iron. It is a sound no Roman has ever heard. In the chaos, a cavalry horse rears violently, its eyes rolling back in terror, refusing to charge into the gray fog ahead. Out of the mist, a mountain of flesh emerges, a beast with a snake for a nose and towers of wood upon its back. The legionaries freeze. They are not fighting men anymore. They are fighting monsters. On that day in 280 BCE, Pyrrhus, the warrior king of Epirus, swept the Romans from the field. It was a masterclass of tactical brilliance. Yet, as the sun set over the river Siris, he did not celebrate. He walked among the corpses of his finest officers, his friends, and his elite vanguard, men he could never replace. Only he looked at the carnage and whispered a truth that would haunt military history for millennia. If we are victorious in one more battle with the Romans, we shall be utterly ruined. Welcome back to World Chronicles. Today, we stand on the banks of the Siris River to witness the collision that defined the true cost of war, the Battle of Heraclea. This was not just a skirmish. It was the heavyweight championship of the ancient world. On one side stood the Roman legion, the disciplined, flexible machine of a hungry republic. On the other, the Macedonian Phalanx, the unbreakable anvil of Alexander the Great's heirs. It was a battle of discipline against geometry, sword against pike, wolf against eagle. But long before the monsters appeared to crush the Roman lines, the legions made a shocking opening move, a suicidal charge across a rushing river that nearly ended the war before the first pike could even be lowered. By 280 BCE, Rome was not yet the master of the Mediterranean, but it was already the nightmare of Italy. It was a republic of farmers and wolves, a state that had spent centuries fighting for survival against its neighbors, forging a military machine in the fires of constant warfare. To the Greeks of the south, the wealthy, cultured citizens of Magna Graecia, the Romans were merely barbarians, unwashed, uncultured upstarts who knew nothing of philosophy or art. But these barbarians had a terrifying discipline that the Greeks had long forgotten. They did not fight for gold. They fought for land, for honor, and for the sheer brutal necessity of expansion. The rich city of Tarentum, sitting comfortably on the heel of the Italian boot, watched this rising tide with a mixture of arrogance and dread. They believed their wealth and their walls would protect them, but they were about to make a fatal miscalculation. The spark of war was lit, not on a battlefield, but in a theater. During a festival, the people of Tarentum, drunk on wine and hubris, spotted Roman ships entering their harbor, a violation of an old treaty. In a rage, the Tarentine mob attacked the fleet, sinking ships and killing the admiral. When Rome sent ambassadors to demand justice, the Tarentines did not offer an apology. They offered mockery. As the Roman envoy, Postumius, tried to speak in Greek, the crowd laughed at his accent. Then, a drunkard in the crowd soiled the ambassador's pristine white toga with human waste. The theater erupted in laughter, but Postumius did not flinch. He held up the stained fabric and delivered a chilling promise that silenced the jeers. "Laugh now, but you will wash this toga with your blood." The laughter died quickly when the Roman legions began their march south. Tarentum, realizing they had provoked a beast they could not kill, looked across the sea for a savior. They needed a general who could match the ferocity of Rome, a champion of the Hellenic world. They sent their plea to Epirus, to a king named Pyrrhus. They thought they were hiring a glorified mercenary, a sword for hire to fight their battles while they watched from their walls. But they did not understand who they had just invited into Italy. They had not summoned a servant. They had summoned a man who believed himself to be the second coming of Alexander the Great. And he did not cross the sea to save a city. He came to build an empire. Pyrrhus of Epirus was no ordinary warlord. He was a second cousin of Alexander the Great, and he carried the blood of Achilles in his veins, or so he claimed. He did not come to Italy to save a city. He came to carve out an empire in the west that would rival Alexander's in the east. He brought with him an army of 25,000 professional soldiers, hardened veterans who had spent their lives perfecting the art of killing. At the core of this machine was the Macedonian Phalanx, a formation that had conquered half the known world. Imagine a forest of iron moving in perfect unison. The Phalangites wielded the sarissa, a pike up to 18 feet long, held with both hands. When lowered, these pikes created an impenetrable wall of spear points, 5 rows deep, projecting well beyond the front rank. To attack a phalanx from the front was suicide. It was like charging a porcupine made of bronze and hate. The phalanx was designed to hold, to pin the enemy in place, while heavy cavalry, the hammer to the phalanx's anvil, swung around to deliver the killing blow. It was a system of mathematical perfection, rigid and terrifying. Facing this wall of pikes were the Roman legions, a force that looked chaotic by comparison, but possessed a genius of its own. The Romans did not fight in a single solid block. They fought in maniples, small flexible units of 120 men, arranged in a checkerboard pattern. This was the triple line system, the young hastati in the front to tire the enemy, the prime principes in the second line to deliver the heavy blows, and the veteran triarii kneeling in the rear, the final reserve. Unlike the Greeks, who relied on the collective push of the pike, the Roman soldier was a swordsman. He carried the scutum, a heavy curved shield, and the gladius, a short stabbing sword designed for the intimate butchery of close-quarters combat. The legion was not a wall. It was a pack of wolves, able to bend, retreat, and encircle. When Pyrrhus rode out to scout the Roman camp across the Siris River, he did not see the disorganized barbarian horde he expected. He saw a fortified city of tents, laid out with geometric precision. He saw sentries who did not sleep, and patrols that moved with a singular, terrifying purpose. He turned to his aide and muttered a line that betrayed his sudden doubt. The discipline of these barbarians is not barbarous. We shall see whether their deeds are worthy of it. Pyrrhus realized then that he was not fighting a mob. He had expected a ritualistic chess match of maneuvers. He was about to step into a meat grinder. The river Siris flowed between the two armies, a natural moat that Pyrrhus intended to use as a shield. He posted his light infantry, slingers and archers, along the banks, confident that the Romans would not dare attempt a crossing under a hail of missiles. To the king of Epirus, this was standard military doctrine. Force the enemy to bleed for every inch of water, tire them out, and then shatter them when they tried to climb the muddy bank. But Publius Valerius Laevinus, the Roman consul, was not interested in Greek doctrine. He looked at the river not as a barrier, but as a delay. In a move that stunned the Epirot commanders, and the Roman army did not stop to form lines or negotiate, they simply attacked. Laevinus split his cavalry, sending horsemen thundering upstream and downstream to locate fords, bypassing the Greek skirmishers entirely. Suddenly, the Greek light troops found themselves flanked, threatened by Roman cavalry charging out of the river mist on their wings. Panic rippled through the defenders on the bank. Seeing the enemy waver, the Roman infantry did the unthinkable. They plunged straight into the main channel of the Siris. The water churned into a frothing, bloody soup. Thousands of legionaries, weighed down by chainmail and heavy scutum shields, waded through the waist-deep current. They slipped on mossy rocks, grasped at the tunics of their comrades to stay upright, and held their shields high against the rain of arrows. It was a chaotic and drowning struggle, but the sheer aggression of the assault broke the Greek defense at the river's edge. The skirmishers fled back to the main line, leaving the bank to the Romans. Pyrrhus, watching from high ground, realized with a start that his plan to bleed the Romans in the water had failed. The chess match was over. The grinding of bones was about to begin. He was forced to abandon his defensive posture and commit his heavy infantry far sooner than he had planned. The collision of the two armies was not a charge, but a car crash of thousands. As the Roman lines surged forward, wet from the river, they slammed into a wall of iron. The sarissas of the Macedonian Phalanx lowered in unison, presenting 5 rows of spear points that projected far beyond the front rank. For the Roman legionary, this was a nightmare made real. To strike at the enemy, he had to walk through a forest of razor-sharp steel. The first rank of Romans threw themselves onto the pikes, hacking desperately at the shafts with their short swords, trying to force a gap, while their comrades behind them pushed, shoved, and died on the points of the spears. It was a battle of contrasting geometries. The phalanx moved like a machine, rigid, inexorable, a slow-moving glacier of bronze. The legion fought like a pack of wolves, fluid, violent, constantly probing for weakness. The air filled with a metallic shriek as Gladius met Sarissa, the snapping of wood and the screams of men impaled before they could even swing their swords. Historical records tell us that the lines broke and reformed 7 times. And 7 times the Romans were pushed back by the sheer weight of the pike wall. 7 times they rallied, reorganized their checkerboard formations, and threw themselves back into the grinder. The grass grew slick with blood, and the dust rose so thick it choked the lungs of the shouting officers. Neither side could break the other. The Romans could not get close enough to butcher the Greeks, and the Greeks could not move fast enough to shatter the Romans. It was a deadlock of exhaustion, a stalemate written in corpses. Pyrrhus, watching from his command post, saw his elite phalangites tiring, their arms heavy from holding the great pikes. The Roman line was bending, buckling under the pressure, but it would not snap. He realized that standard tactics had failed against this stubborn Italian enemy. If he wanted to win, and he needed to break the rules of warfare, he needed to play his trump card, a weapon the Romans believed to be a myth. Seeing the Roman lines buckling, but refusing to break, the king of Epirus signaled his reserve. From behind the wings of the phalanx, 20 gray shapes emerged, looming over the battlefield like moving hills. To the Roman legionaries, who had spent their lives fighting Samnites and Etruscans, these creatures were beyond comprehension. They had no name for them. In their terror, they called them Lucanian oxen, grasping for any familiar reference to explain the monsters charging toward them. These were not merely wild beasts. They were living siege engines. Each elephant carried a wooden tower on its back, manned by archers and pikemen who rained death down from above, untouchable by Roman swords. But the true weapon was not the arrows. It was the smell. The Roman cavalry, stationed on the wings to protect the infantry's flanks, disintegrated before contact was even made. Horses are terrified of the scent of elephants, and the Roman mounts, untrained and skittish, went mad with fear. They reared, bucked, and threw their riders, refusing to advance into the strange, musky stench rolling off the gray giants. In moments, the Roman cavalry ceased to be a fighting force and became a chaotic stampede, trampling their own infantry in a desperate bid to escape. With the flanks exposed, the elephants crashed into the Roman heavy infantry. The impact was not a collision of lines, but a massacre. The hastati and principes, disciplined soldiers who could hold against any man, and found their shields useless against tusks that could flip a horse and feet, that could crush a centurion into paste. The elephants didn't just kill. They broke the psychological reality of the battlefield. Men who would stand firm against a wall of spears threw down their weapons and ran, their minds unable to process the horror of being stomped into the mud by a creature the size of a building. The panic was infectious. It started on the wings and raced toward the center. The Roman line, which had held firm through 7 grueling assaults by the Phalanx, shattered in minutes. The Lucanian oxen trampled indiscriminately, their trumpet blasts sounding like the horns of the underworld, driving the legions back across the river in a disorganized, terrified rout. The battle was won. The Roman army was broken. But as Pyrrhus rode his horse through the field of slaughter to survey his triumph, he saw something in the faces of the dead Romans, and in the staggering losses of his own men, that froze his blood. He had expected a glorious victory. What he found was a graveyard of his own making. As the sun set over the Siris River, the screams of the dying replaced the roar of the elephants. Pyrrhus of Epirus was the master of the field. His cavalry chased the broken legions back toward Rome, and his soldiers stripped the armor from thousands of Roman corpses. By all military standards, it was a crushing triumph. He had met the rising power of Italy and swept them aside. But as he walked among the pyres that night, the sweet smell of incense could not mask the stench of burning flesh. And the king's face was not one of a victor, but of a man who had just lost a limb. The butcher's bill was terrifying. Historical sources estimate that while the Romans lost perhaps 7,000 men, Pyrrhus had lost nearly 4,000. On paper, the numbers favored him, but numbers on a page do not bleed. The 4,000 men lying dead in the mud were not conscripts. They were his friends, his generals, and the elite veterans who had followed him from Epirus. They were the irreplaceable core of his war machine. He could not snap his fingers and conjure another phalanx in the middle of a foreign land. Every sarissa broken, every officer killed, was a permanent reduction in his power. When an aide congratulated him on the victory, Pyrrhus looked at the carnage and delivered the line that would echo through history. If we are victorious in one more battle with the Romans, we shall be utterly ruined. This was the birth of the Pyrrhic victory, a success so costly that it is indistinguishable from defeat. He realized that while he could defeat the Romans tactically, he could not defeat them strategically. The Romans were fighting on their own soil. For every legionary he killed, 2 more were already being levied from the farms of Latium. The silence in the Greek camp that night was heavy, broken only by the groans of the wounded. There was no looting, no raucous celebration. Across the river in the defeated Roman camp, the mood was grim but strangely unbroken. The survivors were not fleeing to their homes. They were regrouping, sharpening their swords, and waiting for fresh levies to arrive from the north. Pyrrhus had won the battle, but he had just discovered the terrifying superpower of the Roman Republic. It wasn't their swords, nor their tactics, it was their endless supply of suns. The Battle of Heraclea was a tactical masterpiece that should have ended the war. In the ancient world, when a king defeated an army, the loser usually sued for peace. But Rome was not a normal state. It was a hydra. Cut off one head, and 2 more grow in its place. Pyrrhus, hoping to leverage his costly victory, sent his most silver-tongued diplomat Cineas to the Roman Senate with generous terms. He offered peace, autonomy for the Greek cities, and a simple request: just leave us alone. The Senate, shaken by the reports of monsters and the slaughter of their legions, wavered. For a moment, it seemed the Roman wolf would bow its head. Then, an old and blind man was carried into the Senate house. Appius Claudius Caecus, the builder of the Appian Way and the living embodiment of Roman stubbornness, rose to speak. He did not offer logic. He offered fire. He scolded the senators for even considering peace with a foreign invader. Rome, he thundered, never negotiates while an enemy army is on Italian soil. His words shamed the Senate into rejecting the offer. They sent Cineas back to Pyrrhus with a message that was as simple as it was terrifying: get out of Italy, or we will fight you forever. Pyrrhus would go on to fight the Romans again at Asculum, winning another Pyrrhic victory that bled his army white before finally abandoning Italy entirely. The lesson of Heraclea was brutal and clear. The Macedonian Phalanx, once thought invincible, could be bled. And the Roman Republic, what once thought to be a collection of barbarians, possessed a political will that no king could break. Heraclea proved that in the grim calculus of empire, it does not matter how many battles you win if you cannot survive the peace. Rome had lost the battle, but in the fires of Heraclea, they had forged the strategy that would one day conquer the world. Total war, total mobilization, and the absolute refusal to accept defeat. If you enjoyed this analysis of the original Pyrrhic victory and the rise of the Roman war machine, please subscribe to our channel to relive more heroic chapters of history with us.